Hi.
How's it going, man?
Good, good, Robin.
Good.
So thank you once again for taking the time out to talk to us. I mean, we wanted to get you on the show to get your thoughts on the UFC 210.
No problem. I'm sorry it's hard to get a hold of. I was just traveling so much. It was very
No problem.
challenging. I'm
Completely
glad it worked.
understand.
Yeah, but thank you. Yeah, thanks for being on the show. And we saw your interview with Dominic Cruz, and it was great. We just loved it.
Thank you.
Very
Thank you.
dynamic
Thanks
in
for
the car.
sharing it
Yeah,
around.
yeah, it was nice. We really liked it.
So Rob, I know before we jump into UFC 210, I just wanted to talk to you about your experiences in MMA because obviously you've dabbled in Taekwondo, you dabbled in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you got into mixed martial arts to begin with.
Well, growing up in Taekwondo as a kid was like sort of normal kid stuff. It was my big hobby and my passion and what I really loved. And when you're a kid and you take martial arts, I think it shapes you a little bit. You start to think about everything in terms of what belt do you get next, and how do you work to black belt, and how do you accomplish the next task, And I think that I was very lucky that I got to train that as a child. And then in my 30s, it just became, I hadn't done martial arts from about 20 to early 30s. And I was playing in a rock band and traveling around and partying a lot, and it was really fun. But somewhere in my 30s, it became apparent to me that that was what was missing again. And as soon as I started to train, I just thought about fighting. And as soon as I kind of dipped my foot back into martial arts again, that was all I was interested in. And then that just started a snowball of train, fight, learn, analyze. And the last 15 years of my life, my first fight was about 9 years ago. So I started really focusing on training for that a few years before that. So it's been the last 12 to 15 years of my life. Martial arts has been this kind of the center of it again. And it's been the best 12 to 15 years of my life, I think.
Right. So, when you saw the UFC 210 pay-per-view, and obviously, with your background in mixed martial arts, your background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the first fight, so now the thing is, we want to talk about all the fights on the card, but the prelims fights, they are not telecasted in India. Only the main card is. So, the first fight itself, Will Brooks and Charles Oliveira.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get your thoughts as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, because what Oliveira brought to, the cage was completely different from his previous two fights. He was, and I'm a big fan of. I thought he was the next big thing because of what the promise he showed in Bellator MMA, coming to UFC, getting the last fight that he fought was against a bigger opponent. So, you could kind of see the fight going the way it did. So what did you think of that first fight itself, where you had someone with such extensive background in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a complete mixed martial artist in Will Brooks?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Will Brooks, too. And it's tough for him to come in. He did beat Ross Pearson. It was a great fight. And then he hasn't really got going. In the fight against the other Oliveira, Cowboy Oliveira, he just didn't get going very well. And then in this one, Charles Oliveira gets his back early. And these days, it's really cool to see. There was once a time, you had to really fish it under and make sure it was in. These days, if someone's across your jaw or even your face, they're able to apply so much pressure that they can, you feel your jaw going or you feel your teeth going. And I've felt that before, where the bottom row of your teeth, maybe they will break. You're not certain, but your brain starts to send you messages that your teeth are breaking, that your jaw is breaking. And we've seen that is true. We've seen many people have their jaw broken. We've seen the top fighters. And there's also an element here where the body turns, where it's across the face and it's an entire torso turn. Frankie did that to my buddy Cub Swanson.
Right.
We saw a guy named Misha Serkinov break someone's jaw that way. So it's not just that your brain is trying to protect itself. We know that that's true, that your jaw or teeth can be broken. So people apply it there, and sometimes the pressure is so hard that what you actually do to react to it is work your chin out of it, and then you're in the choke. So because of that, people are using that a lot, and it's beautiful and it's really cool. What I liked about that fight and about Oliveira's submission, the submission itself was amazing, but is the philosophy that he's employing. It's very, in that fight, it was very much like Damian Maia. It's single-minded. We know what we're trying to achieve, so let's achieve it one step at a time. We must get a hold of you, and we must get to your back. In this case, we don't even need to take you down. We're changing the order of things. Once upon a time, we would get a hold of you, we would take you down. I would pass, pressure you, hurt you, at some point you give up your back. Oliveira and many others like him are like, we don't even need those steps. If I can get your back shoulder, I can get myself to your back, and I can get on my back. I don't even need under your chin. You know what I mean? I love how he's committed to it in such a way that we don't need the takedown. We don't need under the chin. We're just finding hacks to get that choke. So it's really cool. And, you know, we're seeing that approach taken a lot. It's as if some of the requirements, like the rules that used to be there, are no longer there. People are just saying, I don't need to do all the steps you tell me. If I get on your back and that pressure your jaw and I get my submission in properly, I'm going to get you. And he did.
Right. So do you think, because you brought it up, you know, there's an interesting scenario where even someone like Damian Maia in his past few fights or in the past couple of years has kind of evolved his BJJ by integrating wrestling into it. So do you see that as a game changer now?
I think both Damian Maia and Charles Oliveira have decided that they don't need to put in the exact same collegiate style wrestling as other people have once done. The idea of the well-rounded athlete, I'm doing a lot of quotations today because I think a lot of these rules and structures that we believe are untrue. You know, well-rounded athlete means boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and Muay Thai. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if it's true the way that we've decided we have to combine these particular arts. Maybe by being just way, way, way better at Brazilian jiu-jitsu and applying a couple of key wrestling concepts and getting very, very good at those will be better than becoming a master of old school wrestling and you know, a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and a pretty high level wrestler. Maybe being a second degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and having a few wrestling concepts that direct your to your Jiu-Jitsu approach. Maybe that is a better approach. There's a lot of things. What I'm discovering as somebody who's been deeply studying martial artists and martial arts as a practitioner, but more, I spend a lot more time as a third-person observer, analyzing what I see. I think there's a lot of things that we treat as facts and rules that are not true. And I think that's one of the beautiful and amazing things that I'm discovering is, you know, this critical nature. I'm not critical of artists or fights, but I'm critical of what we think is true now. And I found that to be really exciting as a researcher and analyst.
All right, so now we've talked about this fight, but the other, you know, interesting fight on the card was between Alves and Cote.
Okay, yeah.
So, you know, going into the fight, I thought this would go to the decision mostly because no one fighter had clear edge over the other in any other departments. Although, you know, we talk about Alves is very good boxing. You know, Cote was again one of those guys that was, you know, that could persevere in a fight. You know, he was someone that has showed it previously in his fights that he could hang on, he could churn out you know, a decision victory. What did you think of that fight?
I really enjoyed it, and it surprised me actually. There's a couple of elements that I always take into account, and one is that what we think we know about the fighter is often untrue, because either we haven't seen them at their best or they've just got way better since we saw them last. And you can improve in things and change dramatically for the rest of your life. 70-year-olds can become better at playing piano or doing chess or doing yoga or anything. You know, we can do it forever. So I'm very hesitant often to think I know exactly how this fight's going to go, because the comparison that we're making is them some length of time ago. knowing that they'll change. But even in that context, what I'd found was that Thiago Alves had not modernized as much as some other fighters had. He still liked to push. There's this style from, in 2012, 13, 14 that guys were using. And you think of Jose Aldo and Renan Barão as, and Eddie Alvarez and guys like that as kind of the prototypes early. They'd push forward. They would take whatever damage they had to. And if they had strong enough offensive weapons, they would overwhelm you. In Thiago's case, it was left hooks and low kicks. And so guys have modernized a lot, that instead of just pushing forward and blasting in, they've kind of pushed and pulled and played with range and made people miss more and move their feet. And it become much more three-dimensional in that instead of going forward and backward, they go off on different angles and they push and pull. And the relationship between the two fighters became much different. But I hadn't seen Thiago do that as much as some other guys had. And I definitely have seen Pat do that. And even an example of Thiago being beaten up, although it was a fight he did win, was in round 1 against Jordan Meehan. Right. You see Jordan moving off on angles like Dominic does or Cody does or TJ does, and you saw Thiago not being as mobile. So although I'm hesitant to ever say, well, that's who he is, he's not mobile, because I know he can get better at that. I still hadn't seen that much growth, so I was starting to anticipate maybe we'd see Pat making him miss more. But Pat was Thiago got way better at that. You saw it. You saw a lot of growth in Thiago Alves, which is super cool. And the other was Pat went out there knowing it was his last fight and just wanting to go for broke. Right. So he became a little less, spatially manipulative, and Thiago became more set. So what you got was it surprised me in a cool way. I'm Pat's friend. I like Pat very much, and I admire him, and he's a very big fighter here in Canada. But personally, I really like Pat, so I felt for him. Knowing it was his last fight. But also in round 3, I could see him just cherishing the moments, playing and swinging and having fun. And right then I turned to the other guys and I said, I guarantee this is Pat's last fight. Because I knew, Pat, in that moment, that was for him. That wasn't because he wanted it to win. He wanted to enjoy the last few minutes of his fighting career. So there was a lot of cool things, and I felt for Pat, but I was also very pleased to see how good Thiago Alves is, because every time you see that, what you can anticipate is how much better they'll even be next fight, where they're going next, and so that was very cool to see. I enjoyed that fight. It might have been, my favorite fight of the night, really, because although the other two were curious and interesting, that one was just pure in its enjoyment,
Right, and you talked about Jose Aldo, Renan Barão, all of these fighters kind of developing that style. So I just wanted to ask you this. Do you think if you're a volume striker and, then you concentrate on your movement, that kind of compromises your, structure, your fundamentals, who you are? Because, you throw so much volume, and when you go into that movement, then you're kind of decreasing the amount of volume that you throw and concentrating more on your footwork and your movement. So do you think it's a compromise when we compare both of those?
I really like the way you think, my friend, and you are uncovering a very cool idea, and what you're saying is true, and it's also limiting in some ways. So. In the micro, yes, what you're saying is absolutely true. So, but there's a lot of elements to this. So the stage that you're at, when you study fighting, as a fighter, as a coach, as an analyst, as a fan who knows more, excuse me, you move through different stages of it. And there is a stage, and it plateaus you at some point. And there is a stage where you start to label everything. How's his volume? How's his movement? What does he do with takedown defense? How is his footwork? What's going on with his head movement? It makes sense to identify all of these things. It makes sense. And it's very helpful because you start to identify. And then the next stage, and you're on it right now, is understanding that they're not just categories, but there's relationship between all of them. So as someone who throws a lot of punches or kicks, then he decides to learn to move his feet. That's going to change. The relationship between those things is going to change. Somebody who they say, oh, he gets hit so much, he needs more head movement. Well, if you move your head a lot more, what does that do to moving your feet? What does that do to how many punches you throw? So there's a relationship between all of them. And you're very smart to be coming to that. I don't know how long you've studied fighting, but to get to that stage can take a very long time. And you're there fairly early if you haven't been studying fighting for decades. And it's a very, very smart thing. What I would challenge you to do is at the next stage, you try to dissolve all of these categories. And that is a very scary proposition because we're like, his strike. At first we say, how is his striking? How is his wrestling? How is his jiu-jitsu? How is his cage work? How is his takedown defense? How are his takedowns? At the next stage, we don't just say striking. We say, how is his boxing and how is his kickboxing? At the next stage, we ask and we say, how does he move his head? Is he quick? How much we use volume? How's his output? Then we say, how's his durability? And we just break it into more and more and more categories. Then we understand that there's a relationship between all of them. But at some point, stop using them all. Don't even break outside of the point of even using these categories. That's the challenge. That's the next challenge for you. Because at that stage, and a fistful of times in the last month, but Bruce Lee said, learn the principles, abide by the principles, and then dissolve the principles. So once you get to the stage of dissolving the principles, you see fighting in an entirely different way. But you're already at a point where you're at a very interesting stage of analysis and study because you are seeing them, and then you're now seeing the relationship between all of them. And seeing the relationship between all of them makes you realize that even volume, I hate that term in some ways because it just became the thing we said, and Brian Stan or somebody will use it. And in commentary, you use terms because you have to understand that the audience, they don't have a lot of time to study fighting and they don't care that much. They just want to see some heavyweights punch each other, and they like fighting, they like the UFC and stuff. So your job is to somehow give them enough information. Your job isn't to analyze all the flavors and textures and stuff, but I think we should do that if we are really interested in it ourselves. So volume, that term, means you do a lot of offense. Well, we can't just assign that to mean something to be great. More volume is better than less volume. That's not true. If I fought for 5 minutes and I threw one punch and I knocked you unconscious, that's probably better, and I never got hit. That's better than if I threw 300 punches and you threw 301. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there are more of anything. Better, more footwork is not better. More offense is not better necessarily. And it's these concepts, by breaking them, is how we're seeing fighters do such magical things. Oliveira was able to do what he did because he dissolved the principles. The principles were get to the body, get a double leg takedown, pass to side, get to mount. Elbow twice, take the back. Get both hooks in, make sure you get underneath the chin. And he was like, nope, get to the back, jump on the back, pressure the chin, get him. By dissolving those principles. And it goes for the way, it starts with how we look at it. And you guys, it's been a fascinating month for me because I have been working in Russia. ACB is bringing me in to do commentary and analysis. I've been working for Monster Zim in Korea, and I've been noticing that in India there's starting to be a lot of fighting. And you guys have a very cool opportunity here, and that is that as the people, you guys and others, and I'm thrilled to be chatting with you, as you start to influence people about fighting, you don't have to start. America's very behind. very, very, very behind in the way that they talk about fighting, because it's been done a certain way for 12 years. And the nature of media is that people imitate, and they're happy to imitate, and they're scared to innovate. So you guys are already discussing fighting on a higher level than a lot of fighting is discussed in America. A lot of it is, you know, discussions around the rankings and discussions around title shots and discussions around Twitter beefs and how many pay-per-view sales. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. And what you guys are doing now in a country that's just going to be exposed, a lot of people in your country are going to be exposed to fighting just this year. And the conversations that you're having are much higher level than 90% of the conversations that are happening in America. And that's happening in Korea, that's happening in India, and that's happening in Russia. And those are big places for fighting. So it's super exciting. You know, it's exciting to have a conversation with you guys and see where you're at, how far along you are, and how much further you are than most of the sort of reporting style that's been predominantly in America. To me, analysis, reporting is, this thing happened. There you go. There, look, it happened. Analysis is, why did it happen? How did it happen? And what does it mean? And that's what you guys are doing. It's really cool.
Right. And, you know,
great. Thanks.
Before we go to the next fight, I also want to ask you this, because you just talked about, I essentially call them the building blocks in fighting. You know, do you think that is because, and by that I mean, you know, we talk about, say, the volumes to the movement to the defense, and we don't talk about the amalgamation of all of that, mostly because of how the judges see the fight and score the fights. Because if you look at the unified rules, it's more of, you know, the building blocks. It's not just the amalgamation of what goes on inside the cage. Do you think the conversation is not steered towards a more advanced technique or the more advanced stage, because essentially the rules themselves are kind of in those building blocks phase?
That's a really great question, and what you're asking brings sport, rules, scoring into martial arts, and that's another very, very smart question. My personal opinion is, if we study the truth of the martial art, the truth of combat, we will elevate those other things. That's my belief. And among those things will be the judges. So the judges, there are a lot of them, and it's very limiting. How could that change? I believe that could change if the understanding and the knowledge of martial arts changes. We'll get to the point that what we do is we bring the audience up. We take there's highs and lows, you know. There's very, very educated, and then there's less educated. And as you raise all of that, the less becomes higher, and the top becomes higher. And if we elevate, one thing you see a lot in the world right now is a self-correcting market. If something ain't cool, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram freaks out and brings down that company, right? You see it. You see it self-corrects. People just won't accept bullshit. And that is true if your company does something that the audience thinks is unethical, even if it's legal or you're doing the right thing. The machine, the audience, the market will correct you. And I think if we elevate the understanding of fighting, and it's doable. People know a lot more about baseball than they knew 20 years ago. They know a lot more. People, what are big sports in India? Cricket's a big sport, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The average person, cricket is the biggest. The average cricket fan in 2017 knows so much more than an educated cricket fan in the year 2005. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
So we need to do that with fighting. If we do that with fighting, and if the judges come along with it, they will learn more. If they don't, the audience will just butcher them. They will, the self-correcting audience, if you educate the fans and the audience, they will butcher them. They'll also eventually push out this nonsensical reporting style and bring in a how and why and what does it mean style. So I think our job, mine for certain, I know what my purpose is, and my purpose is to really, really find the truths and share the truths. And some people will absolutely be like, well, that guy is overthinking it, or wow, he's just talking about nonsense or whatever. But I'm spending 60 hours a week for decades of my life truly studying martial arts. I'll leave some people behind. I'll irritate some others. Some others won't believe it. But if I do it enough, then other people who report on fighting who will go, that is true, what he's saying. It'll make something else. I'm not the only one. There's others doing that. So when you do that, I think you elevate the whole thing. Eventually, people, eventually the market will correct the judges. It will correct the audience. It will. We're living in a society where, because ideas are shared so freely, we have the ability to shape concepts. That's what I'm saying about you guys with a newer audience, that sport that is not like cricket, a sport that is new and weird to a lot of people. You have the ability to shape how they see it, and which will shape how judges work, which will shape how the fighters train. I mean, all of that, you do have that ability. So I think you go in and you drop truth bombs all over the place as best you can. And you don't bring it down because the judges are dumb, or you don't bring it down because the refs are less educated, and you don't bring it down because some segments of the audience think you're going too far. You just push it as far as you can.
Right. So, the next fight, essentially before going to the fight again, I wouldn't want to name, put a label on either fighter, but essentially you felt that it would come down to the grappling exchange more than the stand-up fight, because we have seen what Cynthia could do against Amanda, where she did that gator roll, got the back, and just finished the fight. And you saw Pearl Gonzalez again. She started with striking, boxing, kickboxing, but then transitioned into this very good submission artist, winning 3, I think, of her fights by submissions before her UFC debut. So the first thing itself, I wanted to ask you. Before the fight itself, there was this entire drama about, Pearl Gonzalez probably not being able to fight because of, breast implants or whatever situation that went down. Do you think that the athletic commissions themselves are kind of split between what the rules are for the fighters? Because we saw Miesha Tate having no issues during a fight. Then you come down to Pearl Gonzalez, they say, oh, it's not going to happen. But then they say, okay, it's going to happen. So what is your take on that and the fight itself?
Commissions, for a lot of different things in life and things that we do, experience is going to be the biggest thing. The more experience you have in things, the better you get at them. And the New York Commission has very little experience at anything. They're new. They don't know a lot. And the worst part is, if somebody has very little experience, they don't know what they don't know.
Right.
You can't. You don't know what you don't know. And so as a result, you don't even necessarily know. There's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. It was Dunning and Kruger studied people and their opinion of their own skill. And the less skillful or knowledgeable you are in a subject, the higher you estimate your level of skill. And the more skillful you are, you tend to underestimate your level of skill. Because the less skillful you are, the less you even know how much skills are out there, which is why we live in a world that some people think they know more than a doctor, because they don't understand what doctors have studied. They don't even know the basics of it, so they can't be impressed by how hard that is, so they think it's easy. And if you have some of that going on with an athletic commission, you have them banning somebody because they have breast implants, despite the fact that that's not a thing. That's not a problem. Hasn't proven to be a problem in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fights with that scenario. You have the Daniel Cormier towel thing. Everybody who's been around fighting for years knows the towel trick. The only reason that everybody, I've seen it done on the smallest shit, knows it. The small-time promoter knows it. Everybody knows it. But these dummies didn't know it, which is why it worked. It worked because they didn't know it. Dan had the perfect scenario, dynamic of things. A trick that he could use, and a brand new commission who didn't know the trick. If I do, like pick a card, any card kind of card trick, it'll work on you because you don't know it. But you can't do it to another magician because he knows it. So this commission is inexperienced, and because of that, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. And they have. We saw it that night. We saw it with breast implants. We saw it with a hand on the ground. We saw it with the towel trick. They made a lot of mistakes. Taking advantage of that, I really don't. Most of the things you do are a trick. Most weight cutting things are a trick. You trick your body into dehydrating itself. You go into the sauna, the old sauna trick. You water load and trick your kidneys into releasing more. They're all tricks. Your job is to make weight. And if you use saunas and water and experience and trickery, whatever, But that fight, I really the ladies, and I wasn't, as much as you have seen grapplers perform well in the past, that can be used against you. I enjoyed them striking in the open field and toughness, and I enjoyed how much heart they got to show and were willing to show. And I'll just use this as an example for either of them. I use Damian Maia. Damian Maia's next fight is against Jorge Masvidal.
Right.
Jorge Masvidal will not just look and go, oh man, this guy's a grappler. Because Damian Maia's best trick coming up is not the time he's going to choke somebody out. It's going to be when they're so concerned with that he's going to have a free shot at them.
Right.
So you can't. And that was the same thing with those ladies. If either one thought the other one was only a grappler, they were going to get into trouble. But it was a really fun fight, and they showed a lot of guts, and sometimes that's what you're going to get out of it. The truth is, it's tricky to talk about because people try to bring gender into it. But the skill level in the WNBA, is there a women's cricket league?
Yes, there is.
There is. It's not as high skill level, right? No, it's not. And women's basketball is not, and women's tennis is pretty close, I believe. I'm not an expert in tennis. But fighting is very different. So currently, the skill level, the clean skills and expressions of fighting is not the same level in 90% of women fighting. But it's advancing very, very quickly. It's advancing very quickly. Also, the ceiling, I don't believe, in women's fighting isn't just like men, only not quite as good, which may be the ceiling in cricket or basketball. I believe the ceiling is it branches off very different and could be better in many ways, because the limiting factors for a lot of sports are that women physiologically maybe they have less fast twitch muscle, they may move not as quickly, they're not as physically strong, and so forth. And those things are true in a lot of sports. But in fighting, you see comparisons to other things. Women gymnasts they're different. They're different, and they're not just like men only, they don't jump as high. They're different. Women dancers are different. There are a lot of physical expressions that women and men do, where women do it different and in many ways better. And I think that potential is there in fighting. I think women fighting in the long run could look very different from men fighting. There are smoother types of expression. There's more fluidity. Fighting isn't just about who's the strongest. It's about who is the most fluid and who has the there's all kinds of attribute-based aspects of fighting. And I think some of those, for women in fighting, unlike in other sports, there are some attributes in fighting that women have much better than men. And I think that one day, I wouldn't have said this 2 or 3 years ago, but I think in 3 or 4 years, women fighting, it will be so interesting because there will be fighters who come along that innovate in their own ways. So, and I think we're starting to see it already. And when you see fights like that, where, you see some aspects of that in those fights starting to take hold, it's really cool.
What do you think of Pearl's initial strategy? It was almost like she was being passive-aggressive because she was forcing Cynthia to engage with her, and she was constantly putting pressure, but she was in a defensive kind of way where she was countering and almost trying, this is one thought, trying to tire Cynthia out by forcing Cynthia to engage with her. you know, because she had that right hand high up on her head. So she seemed to have a strategy in place, but somewhere it started to unravel a bit. Now,
that's another really good observation. Is that pressure doesn't just have to be. So what we've done is what you've done there is taken some of those attributes that we were talking about early, pressure, footwork, volume of strikes, and we applied pressure but didn't use as high a volume of strikes, which if it worked, and if she was able to make that work, it would immediately illustrate for us that more strikes isn't necessarily better. That there are ways, if we had drawn out her strikes and caught them all, or got her over comfortable with striking me, so that, you know, she doesn't think about her own defense. There's many reasons we would pressure forward, but I like passive aggressive. I like the way you put that. I agree. It was a little bit passive aggressive. It's a very interesting concept, and I think a very accurate one. I can do things to you by raising the temperature and making you work. You see that often. I commentated some fights the Friday before 210, or the day before in Montreal, and you started to see that a lot. You could really feel it, that there were guys who were a little bit better. So there was a kid named Xavier, and there was another kid named Jesse, and both of them were a little better than the other guy. But their goal was to be way better in the next round, and then way better in the third round. How could they achieve that goal? Well, by pressuring somebody and prioritizing learning over doing. Oh, look, when I pressure them, they use this combination. Okay, great, I'll time that. You learn, oh, their rhythm is this. You learn all these things. So you can get that learning done by pressuring them and making them work. So we learn, that helps us, so we get a little better. And we think we're a little better. Or in some cases, maybe they're even a little better. What is our goal? Well, we want to improve, so the learning is improving. If at the same time they're getting fatigued, well, the distance between us is growing. I'm getting that much better than you. So we're achieving two things there. It's a good strategy, and it's cool that you observed it. I'm gathering information, and I'm burning your energy. And I think you're right. I think that was that passive-aggressive goal that she had. And, you know, it'll work in some cases. You'll see it work, but it'll be an element. Each of these things, once other people see it, and this is one that a lot of fighters are using today, then it becomes in play in every fight. So we're about up and down, or we're, you know, engaging versus staying out. We're about varying the speed, or we're about varying the timing, and we're trying to achieve that thing. So they start layering on all these strategies and sub-strategies and stuff. But that's a really great observation, and I like the way you put it. Passive-aggressive, it's cool.
Right, and
I should patent
yeah, you
that.
should. Although it's impossible to, and I know.
I'm just kidding. Of course, I'm just kidding.
Ultimately, you will come up with in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 new ideas. And if you're lucky and they're good, some of them will be co-opted by people, and they'll become normal. And you will never, you can't come out and say, oh, I was the first one to say that. And I'm saying this for my own benefit too, because I often think that some of my ideas are cool, but either somebody else had them simultaneously, or often you look back and you're like, holy shit, Bruce Lee knew this in the 70s. It took me 15 years to figure out some aspect. Yeah. This guy in like 1978 understood this. It's wild. Fighting is very interesting, and it's very complex. And then all of a sudden it'll be very simple. You know, go over there and hit that guy. The more you,
I don't think the ownership of the idea is as important as the exchange.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Of the idea.
In the long run, if you had one great idea and the world took it, you'd be bitter. You'd be like, oh man, I came up with this Celtic cross thing, and then nobody ever credited me. But in a perfect world, you'll keep coming up with them, and it'll be normal. You will innovate or die, just more and more and more. You'll never settle in, and that's a goal in life. I think that's what the best fighters are doing, and I think that's our goal too, is in 5 or 10 years to look back and go, wow, I knew so little about the thing that I'm studying in 2017. And the only way you'll do that is just keep pushing the knowledge and the ideas.
Of course.
Right. And the other interesting thing.
Now coming to the Weidman. Sorry. Yeah.
The other interesting during the
Sorry,
fight was,
Akhilesh, go ahead. Yeah.
Cynthia, as we've already said, the best thing about her is her transitions. As you used a particular word, you used fluidity, and that's what Cynthia had. You could see, for example, in the strawweight division, women's strawweight division, we have excellent wrestlers and grapplers who are pressure fighters. People like Claudia Gadela, people like Rose Namajunas, they exert more pressure. It's kind of the kind of fight style that DC uses. But Cynthia is completely different. She is more of a Damian Maia that uses her transitions. Her ability, her slickness in those transitions to get the upper hand, to get the back of her opponent. Do you think by far in the division, Cynthia is someone that we haven't seen in the women's division just because of that style, just because of her fluidity?
I tend to be drawn to that, at least right now. That's one of the elements that I tend to, as a fan, really like, as a fan of the work. And, Jorge Masvidal, one of my favorite fighters, ultra fluid. And I think it is a higher level of achievement. I think it's a freedom. If you are very rigid, you can improve that. Once you release that and you let that, it's an absence of tightness, of a mechanical nature. And I think it is a higher level. She is very advanced in that way, but I think you're going to see more and more of that. It grows to a degree when she gets out of her own way. She is very, very fluid. But yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to give that some thought. Fluidity versus even athleticism itself can get in the way of fluidity, but it doesn't automatically have to. I think sometimes some coaches get very aggressive about, I don't want you lifting weights, I don't want you building your body. And I don't know that is, I'm not trying to undermine them, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think you can build the athletic platform and be fluid. And I think that's what she's doing. But I think there are others. I think Rose, at her best, is like that too.
Right.
Now, shall we move on to the next fight from the ladies? So, coming to, of course, the Weidman-Mousasi fight, there's so much which has been said, and so much which has been put out there, both by Weidman, Mousasi. We all saw what happened. I think everybody has their opinions of it. But at the end of the day, what was, I think, for me, I don't know if you can call it not right, but it's like if it was legal, they shouldn't have stopped the fight. Of course, the referee makes a mistake. And of course, this has been said also that if you're not allowed to use a replay, then how did Big John McCarthy, was he saying what he gave advice to the ref inside? Was that based on a replay or was it based on him seeing it? I think it was based on a replay, right?
Well, I saw them having a meeting that night. And all of them, everybody, commission, refs, and I don't think John would give advice on the replay, knowing John. I think, although there may be a replay, I don't think he would give advice based on that. He is very much a rules instructor.
Was it John McCarthy or was it Don Morgliata? I think it was Don Morgliata, the referee. Or was it Big John?
Don was inside, but he took advice. He went and took advice from outside.
Yeah.
So it was now. Having said all of that, do you feel it was the right decision what they did, or should they have just? What was the other options that they had? Rather, could they have called it a no contest? What were the other options apart from what they did? Especially since the doctors then said, okay, he can't continue. Because it didn't seem fair in some way either to Weidman.
They did everything. They did everything. They did everything wrong. We stopped it based on an illegal shot. If we don't, I agree. If we stopped it for that reason, that's the reason we stopped it. We can't then bring in a doctor and have a conversation if we stopped it because it was a clean shot. If it was a clean shot, we don't need a doctor. We either, so that's wrong. And then the doctor, you assess Chris Weidman. And if you have to do further assessment, the fight is over. You don't get him standing on one foot. And I was embarrassed for them and him. And he's a great athlete. He cannot continue. You don't get to choose, well, I think he can. Or he was unresponsive. And you stop the fight. And what you do after that, you stopped it for an illegal knee. I believe that is a disqualification, but if it's a no contest, it's a no contest. There will be a clean rule. If halfway through a round 2 of a 5-round fight, a fight is stopped due to an illegal blow, which is what they believed it was. What it really was is irrelevant. That's why it was stopped. Then the fighter cannot continue. There's a clean rule. And I would assume John was telling him, because John is very much a rules and structures guy. And I'm sure out there, even if he saw the replay, John wouldn't be like, it was clean. John would be, you must stick with the call that you made and make that as a result. So I don't know what will happen, but I really, it upset me as somebody who's been in there and in situations like that. And as a fan and as a friend of Chris Weidman, it really irritated me. Watching 2 doctors make him essentially do a roadside sobriety test when it's clear that he's not fighting, that to me was insulting and embarrassing.
Right now, the fight itself. The fight itself, we've seen Gegard Mousasi fighting a wrestler before in Ilir Latifi. And, the way he adapts to his opponents is phenomenal because, depending upon his opponent's style, he either shifts his center of gravity downwards or upwards. He either lifts his guard or puts his hands down. So he kind of, twists and turns his game plan depending upon how his opponent, does usually in the initial, seconds, how he comes forward, what he does. With Weidman, he knew that Weidman would go for a takedown initially after coming back off his hands, strikes, then he would level change and go for a takedown. Mousasi knew all of that. But this time around, from his fight with Ilir Latifi, he did not have his center of gravity down. He was not looking for takedown defense. He was kind of looking to exert his own game plan. Do you think that was a fair assessment of Gegard? What did you think when the fight started and you saw Mousasi standing upright and he was not, shifting his center of gravity?
I agree with you. And again, it is something where you see the relationship between these things. Because if we say, I want to be lower so that when somebody comes in on my hips, I have the ability to get under them, you give up something that you gain from being up here. You give up something in your ability to strike. So what is the answer to that? The answer, how could I, let's just say for the sake of argument, that I get a lot of advantages by being up here. And I choose to be down here because I feel it helps me stay off my back. The guy, I'm able to stop him when he comes in. But I lose what I gain up here. So how do I fix that riddle? The answer becomes, well, if I cannot develop what I want down here, I'll stay up high, and then I'll answer the other issues that arise. So why can I not get underneath his attempt to take me down when I'm up high? Well, I can't get my hands low enough, or I can't get my hips down quick enough. Well, I could just work on that. I could just develop that skill, improve that ability to solve that problem, and I will. And then I'll also move my feet. If I move my feet better, he doesn't have a straight line to my hips and my leg for that high crotch entry. That'll help. So I start to work on that. And you find all the things that you're going to shape your game. And so he did that. Then we come to the conclusion that works now way better than it used to. It stops 80% of high-level guys' takedowns. So let's even say 90. In this case, it did not, but let's say it did. I can stop now 9 out of 10 of the takedowns of Yoel Romero or Chris Weidman. Okay, well, what do I do on number 10? Okay, well, I better work on that because that's going to happen. If I don't, then 10% of the time I just get beaten. Nothing I can do. So we're going to improve our ability to stay away, get our hips away from him while we're upright, And we're going to build something that when we do go to the ground, we have an answer. And in his case, it is a butterfly sweep or a butterfly sweep, ideally. I think we saw him do that to Machida. And if we don't get it, the butterfly elevates your hips in such a way that I get under and I get back to the feet. So we've looked at improving our game. Instead of saying we had one of two options when we studied our initial problem. I can't stop a guy from coming and taking me down as well when I'm up high, and I can't strike as well when I'm down low. So again, our options were either improve this low or improve the other things high, and that's what I believe he did. But Chris was still able to take him down, so he's still a work in progress. But also, Weidman worked on that high crotch entry to get into the high crotch, and he had 2 or 3 or 4 options off of it. So in that little battle of development and improvement and strategy, Chris won that little skirmish of his Gegard's ability to stop him and his ability to get Gegard down. But Gegard also, when I was talking to Chris that night and Ray Longo and Matt Serra having a beer that night, they acknowledged that butterfly hook inside Chris's leg was the key to Machida surviving down there. Remember, in round 2, though, Chris mounted him. So Chris was able to keep winning that little battle.
Right now, talking about that itself, Weidman's last fight, he admitted that he shot on Romero's wrong leg. You either go for the lead leg or you go for the back leg. There's always an element of risk involved when you're facing an orthodox style fighter. Now you saw something like that happen with Mousasi as well. He shot in for a takedown. That's where Mousasi is standing upright, sunk his underhooks in and managed to land those knees. If you're someone like Chris Weidman, you tried doing one thing against Romero and it backfired with a knee. You tried doing the opposite against Mousasi and again it backfired with 2 knees. So if you're Weidman, how would you assess what the problem is? Because he seemed to get both of them right. First one with Romero, it was just the timing of Romero's knee that kind of ruined everything for Weidman. And this time with Mousasi, it was, as you said, the element of shifting his weight, either lowering his center of gravity or standing upright. That kind of proved the difference. So if you're Weidman, what do you think at this point?
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. And a really good question. And there are some natural answers to it. So let's figure out what the question. Let's find the right version of the question, or find the nugget of what the question's actually asking. I think what we're really saying is we're using one entry. We're relying too heavy on one concept if we're Weidman.
Right. We
keep going in. We like that high crotch entry. We like, and that's our real problem. So, and I think sometimes that's I just saw this recently. Dr. Seuss, the children's author, said sometimes the questions are complicated and the answers are simple. And I think the answer to this one is somewhat simple. We're just doing the same thing too much. We keep doing the same thing. And people have seen it now. That's a really great observation, man. Really great observation. Again, the answer I think is simple, but you had to spot the complicated question to have it. The answer is we got to vary it more, and it will reflect something about our identity as a fighter. We do what works. We do what we're best at. We do high percentage choices. That's all great. It means we either have to add some new tools or we have to change some of our approaches. Probably the short-term answer is hope that everybody believes that they know what you are now and use that to penalize them. So build some things off of convincing them that's coming. So if you're studying Chris Weidman, you would notice this issue that he's coming in on the high crotch so frequently we can figure him out or time him or develop an answer. If you're Weidman, let's start that out. Reinforce that. Come in, get the high crotch 1 or 2 times. And then when they are ready to adapt, you're tricking them. You know they're ready to adapt. You know they've studied you. You know that they think that you're a bit of a one-trick pony in your entries. And then you either get to their back off of their reaction or you hurt them off their reaction. And I think we use that. If we find that we have a weakness And if it's true that we look and we go, wow, we've been using something way too much, the answer isn't just add new things. The answer is, well, they think we're going to do this a lot, so let's find some way to penalize their reaction to this. And I think that's what, I think they're very smart. Matt, Sarah, and Ray Longo, man, they're very good. And Chris is a racehorse, so they'll use that little weakness if they believe there is one, and they won't just fix it. They'll use it as a weapon.
All right.
Now, moving on to the next fight, DC versus Anthony Johnson. It was really interesting, something that Dominic Cruz said to you in the interview, which is that he didn't feel Anthony Johnson's camp, that he pushed himself enough. And I think what he said was to almost near death situations sometimes. So he didn't feel Anthony Johnson had trained basically hard enough for this fight. Now, of course, we can only suppose what was going on inside Anthony Johnson's head, but it does seem like somewhat the fact that he had already decided to retire was, you know, that beyond the middle point of the first round, you know, like he said, Dominic Cruz again said something about, you know, you're not just in your body, but you can see these decisions happening in your head then. You know, and, you know, and we've all, you know, everybody's been discussing about why Anthony Johnson was trying to wrestle with DC, because he started off so well, keeping the distance with the kicks and everything. Now, do you think that is pretty accurate? You know, and can we say that the fact that he had already decided to retire, you know, of course, we can only suppose, kind of played a factor into his loss as well?
In my opinion, I think, and this is just my thought. Some of it is from my own experience. We're all really scared of fighting. Like, we're scared to be standing in front of somebody who's going to hit us. It's terrifying. It's human nature. We're like that as a protective mechanism to protect our brains, our eyes so we can see, our nose and mouth so we can breathe, and our teeth and jaw so we can eat. That's in our brains. And so to fight, you have to learn to override that. And some people are better at that than others. And some of them develop it with skill. But at every stage, and Dom alluded to this as well, and this is my belief, at every stage, you're scared. But you learn, you teach it out of yourself, and you adapt through it. You're scared, especially after you fought once. Although I shouldn't say that. For me, I was scared after I fought once because I knew what it was. I took a lot of punches, and I got busted up pretty good, and so I knew what it was. Some other people can have their first fight, and although they experience some of the fear and some of the uncertainty and some of the arousal, they don't get hit, so they don't necessarily. But getting smashed up and hit and having to fight through that is very hard. And then over time, it doesn't necessarily go away. You just learn how to deal with it. But when people watch fighters and they boo them, or they oh, that guy's a pussy or anything, they don't understand that at every stage you're scared. You're scared thinking about it. You're scared the week out and the day before. But the great ones use that. They learn to use that. And I don't know that at this stage of Anthony's life he has. So whether he was retiring or not, in my opinion, it's all mental. It's just where he's at. And I do a podcast with David Mullins, who's a sports psychology consultant, and I've studied extensively. I have an army of psychologists that I work with. Dr. David Klonsky and I have been studying. He's a professor of psychology at the University of British Columbia, and we've been compiling ideas for a book for years. And my friend Tracy Trudeau is a psychologist that works around performance. Doctor, I have a podcast coming out with him today or tomorrow, probably tomorrow, Dr. Joel Lapata, and he's been studying the connection between creativity and performance. So I have this stable of psychologists, and we've been truly trying to find the answers to it. And it's about performance, the ability to perform, and not perform music, perform fighting, perform public speaking. And no matter how good you get at punching and kicking or talking or dancing or, you know, playing cricket, your ability to perform it under pressure is everything. And Anthony hasn't mastered that, at least not in this stage of his career. He hasn't. And you look back at his fight with Vitor, we've seen elements of panicked vibe in his fighting. And as a result, he's become bigger, he's become stronger, he's become better. All of these are armors. Vitor is very much the same way. And this is not a criticism. This is, you hope that if they saw this, or if they heard this, or if this conversation happens out there, that they would realize training to perform under pressure is a skill that can be developed. It can be trained. Anthony Johnson has trained his body and his skills to such a high level, and he needs to train his mind to get the best out of his body and his skills on game day. And he hasn't done that. He hasn't seen how vital that is. So as a result, he goes in, and whether it's the fear or the anxiety or the fear of the consequences, or he's thinking about the wrong things, he's preoccupied with the result and not the performance. There's all these elements, so many of them. But because whatever they are, he performs poorly. And in his case, poorly is to close the distance on a wrestler, you know, and he does it in a panicked kind of way. And nobody should judge him for it. He took 99 steps towards being the greatest fighter in the world and the light heavyweight champion. He just didn't take the 100th. And most people sitting on the couch took exactly 0. And each of the 99 were very hard. They were very challenging. They were demanding. They were painful. Yeah. So he should be admired for taking those 99, not criticized for missing number 100. And most people took somewhere between 0 and 0. So they don't understand how hard it is to get to his level of almost the greatest. It's so hard. And the difference for him to go over the top would be to study and do the hard work with the mental. And it can be done. You know, I would tell him to go and look up David Mullins. I personally have seen, he doesn't talk about his clients, but I've seen how he has turned these guys into not only better performers, but better learners and better developers, better at growth. You know, I've seen it. And they do the work. He just gives them a path of study to do it. So I would say to do that. But at the same time, if he doesn't want to do that, and currently he doesn't want to do that, he should take a lot of pride in everything he's done, you know?
Right now, you know, this is a twofold question for that.
Yeah. Sorry, Akhilesh, Akhilesh, just give me 1 second. We're just gonna have to take a 2-second break. I just need to change the.
Okay.
We just need to change the battery in the camera.
No problem.
Just 2 seconds. Okay, and we're on again. Now, I think I totally agree with you. That's why I say, you know, we can only suppose what's going on in Anthony Johnson's head, but he is a fan favorite. People love him, and because of that, they just expected so much of him, you know. And I think it's not that they judge him for doing what they did, but I think there is such a large amount of people who almost wanted to will him to, you know, do what they felt he should be doing rather than what he did, you know. So, and I totally agree with you. You know, you're so bang on when you say, you know, it's a primal fear of getting hit. You know, of course, we can only suppose what was going on in Johnson's head, but everybody, you know, there's so many people who wanted to see that fight of him keeping the distance and not engaging like he did, you know. And I think it's that which is kind of feeding into all of these discussions, the what if, you know.
Right, you know, I just want to counter argue what you both said. For example, I think we're kind of underestimating DC's role because, as I said, this is a twofold part. One, before the fight itself, DC said, look, Anthony, I'm going to exchange with you on feet. I'm not going to take you down. You know, I'm going to strike with you. So at a point, you know, there might be this one instance where Rumble might actually take that into his consideration and say, you know what, if you wanna say I'm gonna strike with you, then I'm gonna wrestle with you. You know, would that be a certain element? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I don't think we are giving DC his props here, because if we saw during the clinches, you know, during his previous fights, you saw DC going into the clinches but never shift his hips, widen his legs, and put so much pressure on his opponent like he did with Anthony Johnson. And the second thing that we noticed during the clinches is he got his elbow up. While people say, oh, Anthony could have overpowered him, turned him around, and could have, pushed him away, DC did that fundamental thing that wrestlers often do not do, where he put his high elbow up, which kind of essentially stopped Rumble from turning him around.
He uses the high elbow up a lot for a lot of reasons. It threatens the go behind, which is a big weapon of his. It controls you differently, and he will connect his hands from the high elbow to there and then strike from there. He uses it in a lot of ways. I agree with the two things you said, but I'm going to connect them slightly different. I agree that we are not giving DC enough credit, and I agree that him saying, I'm going to strike with you, played a role. But I think him saying, I'm going to strike with you, played the role to enhance that trauma and primal fear of getting hit. I think that he used his words, he weaponized his words. Why, if you were thinking, well, I got to just worry about his wrestling. DC's a good wrestler, but out in the field, I'm going to beat him up. But instead, DC is like, no. You get hit too. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hit you too. Mm-hmm. And putting that in his head, didn't say, well, fine, I'll wrestle with you. It's like, oh shit, if we sense that somebody is afraid of getting hit, why won't we just poke him a little? Oh yeah, I'm going to strike with you out there, Anthony. I'm going to hit you. That can be the one thing that just pushes that over the edge, that primal nature of your brain to protect itself. All of a sudden, it's like, wait a second, I thought that the open field was my zone. So I think Cormier deserves credit for it, but I think it is for using it as a tool to undermine his confidence.
Right. So, essentially, do you think Daniel Cormier, ever since his fight with Jon Jones, has evolved, not just in his wrestling, but in his overall game? Because against Jon Jones, he looked like that one-dimensional wrestler that really wants to get into those clinches, grappling exchanges, wants to take you to the ground and then put pressure on your opponent. But since then, against whoever he has fought, except for Anderson Silva, DC looked like a much more evolved fighter. He just did not depend on his wrestling or his grappling. He came behind his punches. Again, we have seen with Rumble as well during the exchanges. He did not shoot in, like, for example, what Bader did against Johnson. He did things differently.
Yeah, I think so. I think a guy who never loses ever, losing will make him a lot better. He never loses. He's almost never in anything in his life. He wins at everything. So finding out that there's somebody better than you would drive a guy like that, and he would have improved everything for sure, including going back and assessing the effects of the words that they used and their interactions out in the world before it, and the way that they acted, and all of those things. Even the trickery at the end when Jon Jones puts his hands up in the last few seconds and DC does, and Jones hits him. All of those things probably taught him lessons. I'm sure he examined them all. And if he's like, well, he beat me in this area, I have to improve this area. If I couldn't take him down, I need to be able to knock him out. And I think losing to Jon Jones may have been, if DC's going to beat him one day, it will be because of the lessons that he learned in that fight.
Now, coming down to, of course, the post-fight as well, I agree. Daniel is, one of the best light heavyweights ever, and we have to give him full credit to that. I don't think... at least I was not trying to take away credit from him. I was just saying I think people wanted to see Anthony Johnson doing something, and he did something else, which we've all spoken about. Now, another thing that's, of course, been spoken about And I think me and Akhilesh spoke to somebody, I forgot which fighter it was, who was saying MMA fans can be really funny. You know, you just do not know or understand why they turn on somebody sometimes. And here as well, and even though DC says it doesn't affect him and he's not thinking about it anymore, but, you know, the fact is he is, because he still did address it after Anthony Johnson got all those cures. And, you know, he said, if I said I was never going to come back, would you cheer for me? So it's still obviously playing on him. Now, do you think the fact that he shows that it's playing on him, or you know, there's just something there not fluid enough or whatever, which the MMA fans kind of sniff out, or what is it that they are not giving him his due? You know, it's almost like I feel Daniel should stand there and say the gladiator line, "Are you not entertained?" You know, that's almost like what, you know, he should be, because he's such a champion. You know, like, what does he need to do, or what should he not be doing, rather?
Yeah. He I think he should not be thinking about it at all, because you just can't control it. And the very thing that I think audiences don't like in 2017 in anything is when they sense that you want them to like you.
I like you. I totally do.
Yeah. I don't know why that is. I don't know what it is about human nature.
Yeah.
But for some reason, if people think that you want to be liked, they don't like that. So I think that's it. And I think once he lets that go, eventually people will. I mean, he's brilliant. He's funny. Everybody who knows him loves him. I know Dan, and I just think he's the sweetest guy. He's kind. Like, in real life, Dan Cormier is a beloved figure, and he's a brilliant athlete. He's, you know, he's got all of it. Maybe that's partly why, because maybe on some level people are like, "Look, you got everything, and now you want us to like you?" No, we're not doing it. I don't know what it is, but ultimately, when he lets it go, it'll probably go the best. And he says he's doing it, and I think he is somewhat. But there's this other thing that's going on in the world. We just cannot control the narrative. It goes back to what I was saying earlier about how the audience, the market corrects itself. If there's something happening that they don't like for whatever reason, if your company is doing something, or your product is doing something, or an influencer, these athletes now, there's another term that they use, influencer. They're what they say and do on social media, and what they buy businesses, and it's a whole class of citizen. You know, we don't call them famous anymore because there's 1,000 of them. So instead of looking at, oh, that's a celebrity or that's a famous person, people just say that's an influencer because they have the ability to influence people. And the market will correct you. If you're doing it in a way that they don't like, or it's working, or you don't have the support of the audience, they'll tell you. And they're telling Dan, and so you pivot. And the way that he's going to pivot best is if he just doesn't care about it at all, because I think that's part of it, is the audience thinks you care, they don't like you.
Yeah, I agree.
And if he doesn't care at all, or turns the other way, you know, you can entice them and engage them. I have a feud with a that I don't know why, because you can't control the narrative, with a MMA website, the subreddit of MMA subreddit. So what do? You try to, like, convince them you're a nice guy? You can't. They've made a decision what they think you are. So you can either do nothing, or you can engage them every now and again. So when I started my own YouTube channel, just to test it, I would be like, screw you, Reddit. And then lots of people would go to my YouTube. So you can use it. You can use it. What you're looking for is engagement. If you've got, a lot of the time, the people that will hate an athlete or hate somebody are people who would have no interest. So they hate them instead of any interest. It's not like they would like you and instead they hate you. They would be immune to you. Again, using my own example, it's a whole bunch of people who really, really like Ariel Helwani, who is a good friend of mine, a very good friend of mine. And we're always happy to see each other. And they perceived that I took some jab at him. But fans of Ariel Helwani's, a lot of them are not fans of mine. He does an entirely different gig than I do, which is why we get along great whenever we see each other. I respect his work. It's different than mine. But if you like that work, you don't like mine. They're opposites. If you like my work, you don't like his. So they would be people who didn't like my work anyways. So you can engage them, poke them every now and again, and use that, which will spread your things. It'll put your, it'll sell Dan's whatever he's selling, and you can use it. So he could conceivably, I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but the president of the United States became the president of the United States while engaging the opposite. Not only the people who loved him, but the people who hated him, watched him all the time, listened to everything he said, responded to everything he said. So you can use the hate. You can use it in a modern sense. So Dan could use that rather than think of it as, these are human beings who hate me. They're not really human beings who hate you. They're human beings who, when they engage around your thing, engage with anger or frustration as a game. They don't hate Dan Cormier. They know Dan. If anything, they're all kind of trolling him. They're all kind of playing with him. So he can use that. What he shouldn't do is take it personally. It's not personal. When somebody goes on to Twitter and says Dan Cormier sucks or something, that's not their true opinion. That's in the moment where they're going, I don't care. Like, it's a momentary thought. It's not a whole bunch of people wandering through the world hating Dan Cormier. So as long as he doesn't look at it that way, then he's fine, and he'll just behave the way he behaves. And in addition, if he chooses to, he can use it and poke them, get engagement for whatever other things he does, sell his pay-per-views, or to, whatever other tools he needs people to go to his website, whatever it is he does for a living. He can use that hate very purposefully and engage it. And what it also does is, if you've got a whole bunch of people saying this guy sucks, the people who like you, they engage too. So now instead of 10,000 people saying they like you, you've got 10,000 people saying they hate you, and the other 10,000 people yelling that they love you. So it's all, Chael Sonnen taught me about this. It's all, you can game that if you want. And once you start gaming it, you don't take it personally. You see it just as a game. So Dan may end up doing that. I noticed he was trying to be a little ruder and harsher. He's a big fan of pro wrestling. Dan is a big fan of pro wrestling. So don't be surprised to see him turn heel and start to use these tools. It's not personal. This isn't people's official opinion on you. This is how society communicates now. And if you are somebody who the communication in society is of value to you or your products or your social media or the things you sell, which in his case is fighting and television, then use it. And so I think Dan will figure that out pretty quick.
Yeah, and the thing is, I actually talked to Daniel and asked him if he was embracing the heel in him. And he said, look, man, no, I'm just telling the truth. If people hate me because I'm telling the truth, that's too bad. But the other two things that I wanted to ask you was, do you think Rumble kind of missed a beat going into this fight? Because we all knew that DC had a bad weight cut. We all knew DC coming into the fight wouldn't be 100% just because of the amount of weight that he was putting back into his body. If you take the fight to a whole 5 rounds, DC would be a complete fighter going into the 3rd, 4th, or 5th, or whatever it is. That is one. Do you think Rumble kind of missed the boat on that? And the second thing is, as you said, the fans kind of dictate what happens in a fight. Now you have someone like DC who is wrestling heavy, going into those clinches, going into takedowns, shooting at the hip. But you have the referee who says there's no action, kind of separates the two fighters. So do you think, and that happened twice or thrice in the fight. So do you think Rumble kind of missed those two opportunities, knowing that DC won't be 100%? DC said Rumble won't be 100% after 7 minutes. But going into the fight itself, knew DC won't be 100% 7 minutes after the first minute. So do you think Rumble kind of missed the beat on both of those?
I think if I didn't know firsthand that his coaches were very disappointed in that it was not the game plan to fight this way, if I didn't know that for sure, and I do know that for sure, there would be a discussion that maybe the wrestling is because you think you could fatigue a guy who had a bad weight cut. But I would think that would be flawed because DC's wrestled his whole life. He's wrestled sick, and he's wrestled weak, and he's wrestled injured, and he's wrestled tired. So I don't know that that would be good. But when it was tied up and they would break, I think that's right there reinforcing that primal desire to take away the space and the chaos and the risk. So, I mean, he missed a lot of them, really. And I really like Anthony Johnson. And I really hope that he takes some time but keeps training, and then somewhere along the lines realizes that all of this stuff that he has dealt with that just got him to the 99th percentile but not the 100th, it's all training.
I think, hello?
Yeah, I think it's.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just
yeah.
the video. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Ah.
You guys want to wrap?
Right. Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
So can you repeat what you just said, because I think we'll miss the last couple of minutes.
Not minutes, but just last couple of lines. I think we missed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I really hope that Cormier. Sorry.
Johnson.
I really hope that Anthony Johnson takes a little bit of time off, but then looks at the little things that are still that prevent him from getting to 100th percentile and keep him around 99th percentile. These psychological barriers, but realizes that they're all trainable. They can be trained. They can be improved, just like a jab or a low kick or a kimura. You can train these psychological principles. And the top guys, the Daniel Cormiers, the Conor McGregors, the top people have trained that. And they trained it, and they're black belts in the psychology of fighting. And that can be achieved, and that Anthony takes a bit of time and goes and achieves that.
Right.
Okay. Should we do a wrap-up with that, Akhilesh?
Yeah, I think I've asked everything that I wanted to.
Great. Robin, it was such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for coming on the show, and hope we can engage again pretty soon, whenever you have time.
I would love that. In May. April, I'm going to Russia, and then I've got a week off to visit with my wife, and then there's a little bit of other travel. But thanks, guys. And you guys are doing a great job. You really are. I am shocked to see somebody in a country where there isn't as much MMA have as much knowledge as you guys have. I really mean that. And it's very, very cool. I hope people check out my YouTube channel, because I'm doing a lot of fun stuff there. And check out my Twitter. It's Robin Black MMA. But thank you, guys. Definitely let's do this again. It was a lot of fun, and I can't wait. And until next time, enjoy the hostilities, my friends.
Thank you, Rob.
Great. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.